And the worst thing about social media for kids, the biggest disadvantage, is actually the thing that a lot of parents think is the biggest advantage, and that is that social media. And this is what parents who are justifying it, they'll say something like, "Well, social media, allows allows our kids to network and to stay in touch with their friends." First of all, your 12-year-old kid doesn't need to network. Okay, that's not a thing a 12-year-old needs to do. But second, as far as staying in touch with his friends, that's the problem. That's the whole problem with it, is the staying in touch with his friends. Social media robs a child of his home life, of his family life. Social media and the internet generally have become replacements for the home and for the family. And now when a kid gets home from school after spending all day at school, all day around his friends, he spends most of his time at school around his friends, and then you add in after school activities and when he's actually physically hanging out with them. So you add all that in. He's spending most of his time and his life at this stage with his friends and with his peers. But then he gets home from school and he's with his family for that brief period of time. But now he's still connected to his peers. He doesn't get away from them. Now you have no time just as a family without any of that stuff. His peers and that culture, it's always present. He literally is carrying it around with him everywhere, attached to it physically, always. That's the problem. He has his computer and his phone, and so there's like this umbilical cord connecting him to his peers all the time, always. He remains completely immersed in peer culture, even when he's not physically surrounded by it. He's attached to his peers, always. He has no life outside of them. And that's a bad thing. And if you think about it, with your kid presumably either goes to school for most of the day, or you homeschool him. And if he goes to school for most of the day, you don't see him. You only see him briefly. And when he comes home, the last thing you should want him to do is to stay in touch with his friends. Like, as if he can't be away from them can he not be away from them for a few hours? So if you send your kid away from school, you shouldn't want them to be on social media for that reason. And if you don't send your kid away for school, and he homeschools, well, then if he's on social media all the time, you've basically negated one of the primary benefits of homeschool, which is that he's not immersed in that peer culture and he's not subject to it, and he's getting his cues from you and from adults. He's learning from adults rather than learning to ape his peers. So that separation from peer culture is one of the great benefits of homeschool. It's the point, maybe not the point, it's one of the primary points of homeschooling. But then when you add in social media, if your kid's a social media addict on top of that, honestly, there's almost no point then in homeschooling. You may as well not do it because you have erased one of the great benefits of it. So either way, no matter what your kid does in terms of schooling, I think we should not want our kids to be on social media. They don't need to be on it. There's really no benefit. And the one thing that's usually cited as a benefit is actually the worst thing about it. Now, here's the thing. This is really, and I've talked about this before, this is really what lies at the root of the suicide and depression epidemic among our kids. Okay, we've talked about before how suicide is on the rise. Suicide is much more common among teenagers and preteens today than it's ever been before. This is something that you talk to an older person, you talk to someone who's 60 or 70 years old, and they'll tell you, this is just, you never heard about it. When they were growing up. You didn't hear about this. You never heard about a 13-year-old committing suicide. This happens now frequently. It's terrible. It's tragic. And a lot of times we'll chalk it up to bullying. We'll say, well, they're bullied in school and that's what led to it. But that doesn't tell the full story. The problem is not just that kids are bullied at school. The problem is that bullying has such a deep effect on kids because they're so desperate to find approval and affirmation from their peers because they're so immersed in this culture and they can't escape it. The point is, children have always been mistreated by their peers. That's another thing. If you talk to someone who's 60 or 70 years old, they'll tell you that, oh, bullying happened when I was a kid. It was probably worse than it is now, which maybe is true. But if you're 60 years old, think back to when you were 12. Maybe bullying happened then and it was a terrible thing. But then what at the end of the school day, what happened? You went home. And there wasn't internet. There wasn't a smartphone. There wasn't social media. There wasn't any of that. So you went home and now you were away from them. You were away from that environment. And yeah, you had to go back to it. And maybe you dreaded that, but there was a break. There was this oasis of time where you were not around your peers or subjected to them or to their opinions. And so it was not like you didn't feel like every second of your day you had to spend desperately searching for approval from your peers because there were these big chunks of time where you were not around them at all. That is now gone. Because of the phones, smartphones, and social media, the kids, they never escape each other anymore. They're always with each other, either physically or in the cyber realm. They're always around each other, always. They're always in that world. So it's not that kids are more mistreated now by their peers. It's that they're now more attached to their peers than they've ever been before. Which means that if they're not accepted by their peers, if they're mocked, if they're treated cruelly, that has a much deeper impact on them. Because this is their whole life, is their peers. That's where a lot of this bullying epidemic and suicide and depression, all this stuff in kids, terrible thing, that's where a lot of it comes from, is that attachment, that orientation that kids have, where they're completely immersed in this world together, in this kind of fog that just follows them around and they never get away from it. They never get a break. And they don't want to break because it's compulsive. Internet, social media, phones, it's something that breeds compulsion. So they, at some level, they might want to escape it, but at another level, they're dependent on it, addicted to it practically. So that's when parents need to step in and give them the thing that they really need and more, and at a deeper level want, even though they don't know it, which is a break.